One of the key problems associated with mental health are the negative perceptions we all hold about mental health difficulties, both in ourselves and in others. Which is very curious because 1 in 4 of us will experience significant mental health problems over the course of a lifetime. There are several studies now that highlight that stigma or negative attitudes and its consequences in relation to mental health are more detrimental to the long-term outcome of people suffering from mental health difficulties than the symptoms themselves. That level of discrimination and negative perception is visible both on an institutional and an individual and interpersonal level. Many studies have tried, many treatments and interventions have tried to target that by increasing knowledge and awareness of mental health difficulties, but made very little difference. So interventions based on knowledge and awareness appear to make little difference. What makes most difference is creating relationships and community integration that changes people's perceptions. The historical and current context around mental health has always been as much about its place in our communities as it has about the individual understanding as a disease or disorder. One of the key problems for people who experience mental health difficulties is not the symptoms and the mental health in itself, but often the negative perceptions that they and others carry around them. These kind of negative consequences of stigma and negative attitudes are likely to have a much greater impact on somebody's future outlook and recovery than the mental health symptoms themselves. Historically and currently, the discourse around mental health has always as much been about its place in our communities as it has been about the treatment of symptoms and the neurobiology or psychological context. When we looked at what makes a difference in terms of the negative impact of stigma and negative attitudes, it's not knowledge and understanding. A lot of these campaigns produced very little difference. But it's the relationships and interactions in our communities that can make a real difference for people suffering from mental health difficulties. We know that in terms of negative outcomes, depression and suicide, some of the most negative consequences of mental health difficulties, are very closely related to internalized stigma and negative perception of others. And it's social support and social integration that seems to buffer against these very negative effects. To tell you a little anecdote, Giordano Benedetti, one of the leading psychiatrists involved in the democratic psychiatry movement in Italy, when the asylums were shut down and people were reintegrated in their communities, found that social isolation and loneliness were the key elements that made that recovery and reintegration impossible. So he thought about the arts and community-based arts projects, both in terms of music and visual arts, was the key vehicle to get people reintegrated. So creativity and social contacts came together to, in many instances, make community integration and reduction of stigma possible. This is exactly why projects like this one are so successful, by creating community, creating relationship, creating acceptance, and reducing the barriers that often produce stigma and negative attitudes.